Are you a business owner who has a bad memory that might show up as I'm too frazzled trying to keep track of everything that I'm supposed to do, right? It shows in productivity. Or maybe it shows up in your ability to keep your team members accountable. Do you actually have a bad memory? Or do you actually just have a fear of confrontation? And this sounds like a weird question because, like, why would those two things actually be related? And I'm going to show you by walking you through and breaking down a coaching clip from my Joyous Profits podcast. And if you don't know, on the Joyous Profits podcast, what I do is I bring on business owners and I coach them live on air on how to map out the exact identity and leadership upgrades they need in order to make more stress-free, joyous, peaceful profits. And if you are not able to manage your team and get the most out of them and constantly compensate for them, that's not going to lead to a lot of peaceful profits. This particular clip, what I'm going to show you is how one business owner, his name is Hutton Henry, he's a brilliant tech entrepreneur from England, and he's always had these two recurring issues. One was like a memory lapse when it came to managing his team. What is it that we're working on? And then the actual management issues that he came to work on the podcast. And the one particular clip we're going to look at is he describes this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I break that down for him. I show him what the real issue here is a fear of confrontation and how that's actually masking a lot of the stories that his brain is telling him to actually protect him. How that translates into profit and time leaks he's probably blind to, and at that point wasn't really seeing, and how this perpetuates a cycle of stress. And basically it goes, you can't change what you can't see. So by breaking down what the root issue is, when you can see that, you can actually change that. And I give him the outline of essentially, this is where you need to look at. So check out the first bit of the clip, and then intermittently you'll see me breaking it down further to illustrate that the points that I just mentioned. So here's the clip.
I think the lack of memory is only half of the problem. And then the other half of the problem is I just don't like confrontation. So you put those together, that is pretty lethal.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. So would you say that the lack of memory shows up in other areas of your work or no?
Yeah, I'm really good at client work. It's so everything I can run multiple customer projects and sales engagements and things like that. And there's so many of them ongoing. So my memory sort of relaxes in that. It totally relaxes in code. So software, like it's almost like a photographic memory. And I've always felt that with people management, as much as this is the irony, I love dealing with people and like fixing people issues. But then there's that kind of that missing link. And that's interesting.
So were you able to catch that? Do you start to see where this whole thing begins to actually reveal the self-sabotage and the true driver of the stress that Hutton is experiencing from these management issues? If you didn't, well, I'm going to break that down for you, and I'm actually going to show you the rest of the podcast clip where I dive into what is the root cause behind this. But I really just want to illustrate right now is this blind spot that Hutton's experiencing in this particular instance ripples out into so many things that are hard to see because they are actually indirect. And this is what I mean when I talk about profit and time leaks. Because you see what's going on here right now, and I'm just looking at the script here, like the transcript. He's got this blind spot where it's like, okay, this is a memory issue, but it's now being revealed that it's not, because he's basically saying, like, I have a photographic memory when it comes to coding. I have no issues keeping things in my mind when it comes to client work. But then this one instance where we're talking about employees and delegation and accountability and confrontation, it's very interesting. I have an issue there. Okay, why? As you'll see when I dive into the rest of this clip, it's actually a fear of confrontation. But you can't change what you can't see. And if you can't see the blind spot, then you're going to spend so much of your time and effort trying to solve the wrong problem. Like, you might be trying to get consultants to set up your systems. You might be trying to get better, productivity software. You might be trying to implement better productivity systems. But all of those are actually avoiding the core issue, which is going to be a fear of confrontation. Like I said, we'll dive into in the rest of the clip. And indirectly, because you're not going to see this on your, P&L statements, you are creating all these profit and time leaks because you're helpless to a memory issue. Meanwhile, you're signing checks for poor performance. You're spending a lot of your own time compensating for poor work, making up for poor customer delivery, like all of the ripple effects of that. All of that has very real costs, but those costs don't look like expense items on your balance sheet or whatever. They are indirect profit and time leaks while you're killing yourself, pouring into that bucket, trying to have more available time and profit. So I'll get into more of those specifics, but first I just want to walk you through on the podcast what I reflect back to Hutton to be like, okay, here is the actual root cause of the problem. So let's get into what that looks like. So it seems to me like this isn't a memory problem per se, because it would be across the board if you had a memory problem. It's actually like selective remembering. I will excel in using my brain when it comes to the, technical aspects of things. But when it comes to, and it seems like it's specific to the upholding of expectations, or like the mirroring of this was said, but then this was delivered. That's where there's like a blank in terms of this memory lapse. Like that, is that accurate as far as your experience?
Yeah.
That is. Okay, perfect. So one of the tricky things with regards to the way that a lot of these defenses work is we will in some ways do behaviors or do certain things that quote unquote self-sabotage, but look like just kind of happenstance. And blanking out, even let's just say if I'm in session with a client and we start to probe into areas that are either like emotional or like places that they don't really want to look at, they'll oftentimes blank out and be like, sorry, I don't actually know what it is that you said. And that's not them being rude and not listening to what we're doing. It's actually their brain's defenses to basically disassociate when things start to get squirmy. And the reason that I bring this up is when you're retelling, like, okay, this is where this tends to happen, it's not generally dealing with people. It's actually a very specific thing where, like, if I don't remember the thing that this person is supposed to come back at me with, then it's very hard, or it's harder to actually get into these uncomfortable confrontational areas where your subconscious doesn't really like to go. Before I go on, what lands for you with that, what doesn't, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's the pinnacle of that challenge is the memory and the confrontation.
So does all of that make sense to you right now? This is not a memory issue. This is actually fear of confrontation. And it is actually a trauma response, in this instance, the blanking out of memory, that his system, his subconscious, is just trying to keep him safe by avoiding confrontation. Okay. And you can now start to see the layers of that. That's actually the root cause of what's happening. On top of that, is this self-sabotaging behavior. Okay, and in my work, I call that the overwhelm hamster wheel, because you're just spinning your wheels trying to solve essentially the wrong problem. Okay, and you can never get ahead because it's a wheel, so it keeps turning. So self-sabotage exists on top of that. And then on top of that layer are all of the circumstantial aspects that drive all of that. And then the ripple effects of that are essentially profit and time leaks. And if we're talking about how do you help a business owner make more stress-free money? So not necessarily make more profit, because in my world, the only profit worth making is profit that is as stress-free as possible. It's the only profit you want to be chasing. Okay, like if you're going to chase profit, chase the most stress-free one. Okay, because why else would you do it? What's the point of just having money that you're stressful about? So if we're looking at that as a North Star to operate as a peacefully ambitious CEO, which is what this whole channel is about, this whole movement is about, then the reality is no operational fixes are ever going to get me that. Because if we look at that onion, the operational, circumstantial business side, like that's the outside of the onion. There's 3-4 layers deep. That's really about, I just haven't addressed the core issues around my fear of confrontation. And it's rippling out into a memory issue that I'm essentially lying to myself about, just rippling out into self-sabotaging behaviors, which is then rippling out to circumstances that perpetuate this stressful cycle. And then that ripples out to, well, I'm trying to make more money because I need it to live the life that I want to live. Even if you succeed, you're going to win a game you actually didn't want to play. Okay? And looking at that even further, if you didn't even focus on making any more money, but you actually just removed these types of like blind spot patterns, there would actually be enough for you to like recapture, because you plug the leaks. So in this instance, you're plugging the leaks from like, if I'm writing your checks, I need to confront you and be like, you're not holding your end of the bargain. I need to keep you accountable to these particular results. Like if you just plug that, the likelihood is you are going to get more of your time back, more leverage from your employees, which subsequently means the amount of freely available time and profit to fund your ideal life rises dramatically without you actually having to make more. Like you're able to recapture more of that, right? And that's really what this whole idea of profit and time leaks is all about. And this is a perfect example of how it never looks this way on the outside. But when you know how to assess what's actually going on the inside, you can get to the core of the issue and basically get more out of less. Okay, so if that's of interest to you, my Peaceful Profits roadmap is basically a self-discovery and coaching process that will assess over 64 stress drivers that create these profit and time leaks. And it'll give you a map of exactly which ones are the ones that are causing you the most stress, which ones are causing the most operational issues, and give you the blueprint to operate like a peacefully ambitious CEO. He's somebody that's not driven by these unconscious stress drivers. So you can recapture those lost profit and time leaks and turn them into stress-free profit that funds your ideal life. The links for all of that are somewhere around here, so you can check that out. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.